Thank you, Saeed, for that amazing panel. Hello, everyone. I'm Benson. I'm the Senior Policy Manager for Southeast Asia at GSMA. And I am so excited to introduce the panelists for our next session on public-private partnerships. First up, we have Emmanuel Lazaro Estrada, Vice President of Regulatory Development and Strategy from Globe. Next, we also have Antonio Zabalos, Director for Digital Technologies for Development from the Asian Development Bank. Yes. Thank you. We also have Attorney Catherine Fong, Undersecretary for Privatization and Corporate Affairs from the Department of Finance. And last, we have Jove Tepiador, co-founder of Good Tech. I understand, Emmanuel is on a bio break right now, but he'll be coming to join us really soon. Test. So hi everyone, thanks so much for joining the panel. While we're waiting for many to come in here, I think we are a little bit short on time, so let's, just in time, Manny. Manny, just in time for my first question. Now, I've targeted questions for all the panelists, but as we discussed before, please feel free to jump into the discussion at any point in time. Now, Manny, as a major telecom player in the region, Globe Telecom has such a critical role in the digital transformation process. What do you see as the most promising opportunities for collaboration between the government and telecom operators to foster the development of digital infrastructure?
Well, Benson, back to the basics. First, let's fix the connectivity. And once we get the connectivity done, let's improve the usability. It's one thing having the connection, but having meaningful use and learning how to use the connectivity to your benefit is something else. What I see happening is that in the Philippines, about 96% of the Filipino population are covered by at least a 3G or a 4G signal, but only 63% have active subscription. More interestingly and anecdotally, of the 63%, people are using it for social media, Facebook, TikTok, and while it does create opportunities for personal business and such, I think that is not the real usability that we want. The usability we're talking about is people being able to use it for educational purposes, for connecting to long-lost relatives, for health, for consultation health, and for managing their finances. And that's when it really brings value. So it's both universal connectivity and meaningful usability and connectivity.
Thanks, Manny. That really emphasizes the importance of digital transformation. Now, diving into our topic of PPPs, can you tell us a little bit more about the Connectivity Plan Task Force? What are its goals? What has it accomplished so far? And what does the future look like for it?
The Connectivity Project Task Force, the CPTF, was put together by the Private Sector Advisory Council. It consists of the MNOs, the tower companies, and the government, other stakeholders in the picture. The main purpose is to help and to work with the government to define how we will practically provide connectivity to where it's not yet there. At the moment, we have outlined about 3 steps or 3 phases in the project. The first one is maximizing the use of available connectivity that's already there, and which means that we should be able to look into digital literacy and get people to understand that there's a value into it. And then we will work with government to make sure that the people are able to make use of the service. On the second phase, there's about 150 plus new sites that we are going to build together with the rest of the stakeholders to address connectivities outside of those where we already have connectivity. And the third one, which I believe is really more for the time when we will have our directors to buy satellite services, because these are really in the fringe areas. Now, we counted a lot of barangays, which is the smallest unit of community, that are really in the fringe areas, and because of geographical challenges getting there, getting traditional there, then we believe that satellite connectivity and non-terrestrial network will be a major important solution for those countries, for these areas.
Thanks. That's very important. Now, based on your experience, what kind of your experience with this PPP, what kind of specific policies do you think are needed to encourage greater private sector investment? Or do you have any thoughts on maybe how the government can ensure that such partnerships are mutually beneficial?
Well, there's two types of policies that we needed to address. The first one are the really, really old ones, as stated by our resource person from NEDA. The old antiquated policies are no longer effective and relevant in today's digital economy. The first one. The second one that we need to address is to provide a compelling list of policies that are transparent, consistent, and innovative to a point that investors are going to be willing to invest. They're not afraid to invest because they know that the policy is constant, applies to everyone all across, and at the same time, stable. It doesn't have to change every time there's a change in administration because that's what scares these investors to come in. And the second one is once you get that all done, let's streamline all the processes. There's a lot of headway along being done already on that one. EO32, for example, helped speed up our deployments in the network, and it has really helped in the last 3 years in getting us to where we are right now in terms of connectivity. And I believe those are the policies that we needed to really work at together with the government.
Thank you, Manny, for those great answers. Now I'm going to shift the sights over to Antonio, right, from the Asian Development Bank. So Antonio, the ADB plays such a critical role in funding and advising governments on digital development projects, especially in this region. From your experience, what are key elements of a successful public-private partnership, of course in the context of digital innovation and infrastructure development? And also in your experience looking at the entire region, what are Philippines' specific strengths when it comes to digital nation building? What are some of the characteristics of Philippines that stand out to you?
Thank you very much, Benson, for inviting me here and having me here. And pleasure to meet all the panelists as well. In 2023, the value of the digital economy in the Philippines represents approximately like 8%, 8 point something of the total GDP. In 2030, is going to move from $33 billion to around $150 billion. So basically, it's going to multiply by 5 in a very short period of time. That is one piece of data that tells you the big transformation that this country is facing and how ADB is precisely being a strategic partner on making this process moving along throughout the different phases. And I'm saying different phases because still as the director, and I have to congratulate because your presentation and the plan is simply amazing. Still there are some challenges that we need to keep in mind. One of them is precisely in terms of connectivity. So I think that we still have important part of the population that still is not covered with meaningful connectivity. So according to the latest data, around 47% of the population is still lacking some sort of meaningful connectivity, and that is going to be a big thing. And second, if we just look at the PPP center data that was recently published, and we compare ICT with energy, we may say that the number of PPP projects in terms of energy are 7 times bigger than the ICT. But the figure becomes even bigger when we think about US dollars. So if we think about US dollars, the amount of money that is dedicated to PPP projects associated to energy versus ICT is above 24 times. So it means that there is a huge need of public-private partnership to make sure that we are able to reach out 2030 with these $150 billion of the total amount of the digital economy. And also it means that aspects related to digital skills, institutional capacity, and how to make sure that all the policy framework is moving along. And again, the ADB has already been a strategic partner in terms of digital ID that he was mentioning before, and also in particular transactions advisory services. So I think that those areas are going to be instrumentals, but more importantly, how we can work together, the private and the public side, because it's obvious that to close that gap of increasing in 5 times the amount of the size of the digital economy will imply a responsibility of all the different stakeholders and partners.
Thanks, Antonio. You already talked about the importance of sorting out that collaboration and coordination between the public and private sector. In your view, can you elaborate a little bit more about the specific role of international development banks like ADB? What is your role to play in facilitating that collaboration between the public and the private sector?
Thank you, Vincent. I think that the type of intervention basically has to do with 3 different type of levels, I would say. First, at the upstream, I think that it's going to be particularly important to support the countries across Asia and Pacific in terms of update of regulatory framework. So here today we have been discussing about very important topics related to spectrum, related to infrastructure sharing, related to protection of critical infrastructure, and even protection of data as such. So there is a whole area of collaborations related to update of regulatory framework to make those investments sustainable throughout the time frame. The second, I would say, has to do with the middle stream, and I would say that it has to do more with what should be the pre-feasibility studies and the feasibility studies that are needed to make sure that every single dollar that is invested, either if it's public or private, eventually is going to contribute to the socioeconomic development of the country. And here again, I would like to praise the government of Philippines for having such a comprehensive initiatives, and having a specific mapping tool is going to be very much instrumental for allocating those resources. And third, it has to do with the downstream. So development banks are at the end at disposal of governments. We are just working for them. And when we think about downstream, I think that we have different financial instruments, not only investment programs, but also policy-based loans, like the ones that we are at this moment in time working together, and also some other specific programs like result-based loans. And having such a comprehensive programs like the one that the director was presenting before, I think that the combination of financial products related to PDLs and result-based loans, or even investment loans, is going to be instrumental to come together specific actions at the short term, middle term, and even a little bit more throughout the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. That's super insightful. Now moving on to Undersecretary Catherine, we have heard from private sector, we have heard from the international development banks, but perhaps what people might be the most keen to hear from government perspective. So from a government perspective, what do you see, in your dealings with all the different PPPs coming through? What are the primary factors that drive successful PPPs, especially in the digital sector, and that you will particularly look out for as the Philippines is moving forward with its digitalization agenda?
Okay, thank you for inviting me here. I don't think there's a government perspective in this case. We are working with both private sector and development partners to utilize PPPs to deliver solutions, infrastructure, assets, as well as services. Your question was how can we drive them forward?
What do you see as the primary, most important factors for successful public-private partnerships?
Well, first of all, PPPs are about proper risk allocation. So we've laid down in this administration, we've managed to fix the regulatory environment. Whereas it took 2 to 5 years to get the project approved through the NEDA board, now it just takes us anywhere from 6 to 11 weeks. That's massive. We've passed the PPP code in legislation, so that contains all the learnings of the country in past PPPs to make it more transparent and to elevate the quality of the PPPs that we undertake. But again, I think now that we've put those legislation and the regulatory reforms, I think the challenge now is actually the market understanding what PPPs are. Because I get a lot of people coming to me, but they're vendors, not investors. So it's not a PPP. Don't sell me anything. I need you to invest in something. And when we talk about digitalization, what exactly is the output? Don't sell me a card reader. What is it in relation to, let's say, a tollway or a railway? I was from private sector before, and then I was from ADB. So when we deliver transaction advisory services to the government, for example, electric distribution services for New Clark City, the digitalization is embedded in the transaction. So people will say, oh, you awarded an electric distribution project. But it's not just any electric distribution project. You put in the digitalization inside it, right? There's the smart grids, all these things are already written in the transaction documents. So for me, first of all, to mobilize better PPPs with digitalization in mind, what's the solution? Digitalization is just part of that solution. It's not by itself a standalone product. So we want better tollways, we want better railways, we want better electric power distribution systems, we want better water distribution systems. And vendors shouldn't come to me and say, hey, I have a new card reader or I have whatever, right? No, how is it going to add to an infrastructure that we need? So I think first and foremost, you probably need to form a consortium to undertake a PPP project. We're talking about, I think Sir Manny mentioned education. So how do you, actually DepEd is very much interested in PPPs for providing digitalizing public education, basic education. Again, but you don't just sell him tablets, right? Don't just sell them tablets. So it's a solution. I think that's what the market needs to understand with regard to PPPs.
Yusek, you made a very important point. It cannot just simply be selling you technology. The technology has to address something that is needed by the target market. It's the people itself. That's why in earlier conversations we talk about value for money. To make it really viable and something that people will use, it has to have value for them. If they cannot find and understand the value to them, then they won't use it. And then it becomes more important because then it impacts the way that they live. And then it becomes sustainable.
Thanks so much for those really, insightful. I think you raised a really important point, and actually, I think it's a great segue for me to now target, Jove Tapiadoro here. So, Jove, firstly, Can you explain a little bit about all the good work that your company, Good Tech, is doing in the rural areas, and how that's really affecting the lives of the people living there, facing challenges that, a city boy like me probably wouldn't understand. And the follow-up question to that also is, you've heard from Undersecretary Catherine about the need for market awareness and businesses to be aware about what PPPs are. Would you be able to share some thoughts and reactions to that based on the work that your company is doing?
Yeah, thank you, Benson. I actually wear 3 hats. The first hat I wear, I'm a co-founder and trustee of FinTech Philippines Association, the largest FinTech trade industry group in the country. The second hat that I wear, I'm president of a small, tiny community bank in central Philippines, in Negros. And the third hat that I wear is Good Tech. I'm co-founder of a FinTech startup whose mission is to provide a digital infrastructure for rural banks and other community financial institutions. So I think the challenge in rural areas, let's look at the facts. 1 out of 2 Filipinos live outside urban areas. 1 out of 3 Filipinos have a bank account. 2/3 do not. 1 out of 2 Filipinos do not just use cash as a means of payments. So all of these are friction into having a more, I would say, to be empowered in a digital ecosystem. The reality is that, as what ADB has mentioned, the digital economy will but grow in the country. So how do we support those who are going to be left behind, who don't even have a basic transactional account in a wallet or in a bank account? And this is where I think startups, entrepreneurs step in, because they see a problem, they build a solution. Good Tech is one of those startups. But the challenges are big. We cannot solve all problems relating to financial inclusion in the country. We can only work with partners who have the desire to create meaningful change in their communities. So in our case, we formed a consortium of rural banks and cooperatives and microfinance institutions to address basic financial inclusion in the countryside using a digital infrastructure. In fact, ADB provided grant funding to the rural banking sector, of which we are a beneficiary, to implement such a digital infrastructure for small financial institutions in rural areas. Now that is something I would say is a case study where if government or large corporates can provide the resources to scale that up from a startup to a scale-up, then we can have meaningful impact in the countryside. So that's my perspective, where problems are present, entrepreneurs can solve that, resources provided by government or large corporates can scale that solution up.
Thank you for sharing. That's really interesting perspective. Now, I wish we had at least another half an hour to discuss all of this, but I'm afraid that this is all the time we have for today. So once again, please give all the panelists a huge round of applause for that amazing insights. Thank you.